The Chicago Notary office was perfectly sterile and cold. The clerk looked at his computer screen, then looked up at me. According to the state system, I had been legally divorced for exactly 2 months. My mind instantly audited the past, cataloging the restructuring papers Bradley had pushed in front of me while I was blindly grieving my father's death. He didn't just push papers, he leveraged my grief, coupled with the heavy sedatives the doctor had prescribed for my shock, to ensure I didn't question a single page. I did not cry. I did not ask why. For 5 seconds, I sat in absolute clinical silence. Anger was not loud this time. It was a balance sheet. I stood up, making the first calculated move that would permanently seal his fate. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. I walked out of that office not as a discarded wife, but as a forensic auditor of my own life. For years, I had been the silent investor in our version of a family, building Summit Design Group from the ground up. I was the architect, the heart, and the creative engine. Bradley was the chief financial officer, the calculator, the man who supposedly managed the margins. I designed the award-winning structures that put our firm on the map. He handled the contracts. Over time, a dangerous psychological trap had been set. The trap of cruel normalization. It happens so slowly you do not even register the massive deficit in your own emotional ledger. It always starts with a small critique. He would dismiss my late-night design sessions as mere technical pressure, framing my creative brilliance as a structural liability that needed his steady hand to manage. When his budget projections fell short, I would spend sleepless nights redesigning floor plans to absorb his financial errors. I accepted the blame to maintain the partnership. I normalized his incompetence and my invisible labor. I allowed my value to be depreciated day by day, treating his emotional manipulation as standard business operations. It is a terrifying phenomenon. Abusers do not announce their cruelty. They seamlessly integrate it into the daily operational costs of your relationship. They make you believe that your physical and mental exhaustion is just the price of doing business with them. You begin to accept a toxic environment as the baseline metric for love. I realize now that our marriage had never been a partnership. It had been a subscription, with me footing the entire bill while he systematically siphoned off the equity. I did not drive back to the house we shared. I drove straight to my private workspace. I opened my laptop and began clicking. I bypassed the emotional processing and went straight to data acquisition. Bradley thought because I was the creative mind, I was oblivious to the architecture of his deceit. He forgot that an architect's primary skill is understanding exactly how systems are built, and more importantly, how to systematically dismantle them. He had relied on my compliance, banking on the fact that I would be too devastated by the betrayal to look at the paperwork. He was wrong. They were not shocked by what they had done. They were going to be shocked that I had stopped playing along. My grief over my father was real, but my grief over Bradley evaporated the moment the notary spoke. This was no longer a marriage. This was a hostile corporate takeover. 30 minutes later, I was sitting across from Julia, my legal counsel. Julia was fiercely pragmatic and intensely protective, a woman who communicated strictly in statutes and injunctions. She did not offer me tissues. She pushed a legal pad across the desk. I did not need sympathy. I needed a strategy. He filed the divorce in another county, buried under a mountain of corporate restructuring documents you signed after your father's funeral, Julia stated, her eyes scanning the preliminary filings. He weaponized my grief, I replied, my voice perfectly steady. He knew I was not reading the fine print. I was just signing where he placed the sticky notes to keep the firm running. We immediately initiated a systematic extraction of my digital footprint. I logged into the firm's secure servers, bypassing the front-end interface Bradley monitored, and accessed the back-end archival system. I spent the next 3 hours downloading thousands of company emails, financial ledgers, and proprietary design blueprints. I was looking for the leak in the foundation. It did not take long to find the structural flaws. Bradley had been careless, assuming my blind trust would cover his tracks indefinitely. He had wiped his primary drives, but he failed to realize that as the system's architect, I had implemented a redundant, encrypted archival backup that ran in the background, which he had long forgotten existed. Deep within the deleted folders of his secondary email account, I found the wire transfers. He had set up a network of secret offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. But the money was not just coming from standard corporate embezzlement. I opened a subfolder, cryptically labeled Horizon Assets. Inside were exact copies of my proprietary designs, the sustainable housing concepts I had spent 2 years perfecting, the blueprints that were supposed to be the future of Summit Design Group. He had sold my intellectual property to a rival firm in New York for $3,500,000. He had packaged my genius, stripped my name from the title blocks, and liquidated my legacy. Julia leaned back in her leather chair, her expression darkening as the sheer scale of the theft materialized on the monitor. "He is liquidating the company out from under you," she said softly. "No," I corrected her, staring at the offshore routing numbers. "He already did. The divorce was just the legal firewall to ensure I got nothing in the settlement. This was not revenge. It was accounting." I rubbed my eyes trying to summon regret, but there was only razor-sharp clarity. The man I had married was a financial parasite. He had underestimated the wrong woman. An architect knows exactly which load-bearing walls to knock out to bring a building down. Bradley had built his criminal empire on a foundation of stolen assets, and I held the detonator. By dawn, the office smelled of stale coffee and printer ink. Julia had been running cross-references on the property deeds connected to my late father's estate. My father had left me 3 prime commercial real estate parcels in downtown Chicago, assets that were supposed to be held in an irrevocable trust. Suddenly, Julia stopped typing. The silence in the room grew heavy. She turned her monitor toward me. "I found the smoking gun, Natalie." I leaned in, my eyes scanning the chain of title documents. The properties had been transferred to a holding company controlled exclusively by Bradley. But that was not what made my blood run cold. It was the signatures at the bottom of the transfer deeds and the intellectual property release forms. I stared at my own name, rendered in blue ink. The loop of the letters and the slant of the handwriting were nearly perfect, but the pressure was wrong. It lacked my standard architectural precision. "I never signed these," I whispered. Julia nodded grimly. "He did not just slip restructuring papers into your grieving hands. He forged your signature on the core asset transfers. He forged the notary stamps using a shell company. This is no longer a messy divorce. This is a coordinated, multi-million-dollar criminal heist." For a fraction of a second, the crushing emotional weight of the betrayal threatened to collapse my chest. This was the man who had held me while I wept at my father's grave. The man who had promised to protect me. He had used my darkest moment of mourning as a smokescreen to steal my inheritance and my life's work. But the panic never surfaced. The despair was instantly neutralized, replaced by pure, clinical clarity. I did not break down. I did not ask how he could do this to me. I just looked at the forged signatures and felt a profound sense of liberation. The emotional contract was completely void. The gloves were officially off. "We do not file a civil suit," I instructed, my voice devoid of any warmth. "We document everything. We prepare a forensic dossier for the district attorney, but we do not trigger the legal trap until I am ready." "When will you be ready?" Julia asked, a small, dangerous smile playing on her lips. I looked at the calendar on the wall. The Industry Architecture Gala is on Friday. Bradley is scheduled to present our new sustainable housing initiative as his own solo venture. He thinks he has locked me out of the system. He thinks I am sitting at home, mourning our marriage and my father. I closed the laptop with a decisive snap. I had spent my entire career building structures that could withstand hurricanes. Now, I was going to engineer a public demolition so precise, Bradley would not even see the wrecking ball coming until the building was already collapsing on top of him. The grand ballroom of the Industry Architecture Gala was bathed in golden light, buzzing with the elite of Chicago's architectural and financial sectors. This was the most prestigious event of the year. I stood in the shadows of the backstage control room, wearing a tailored black suit that felt like armor. Through the heavy velvet curtains, I watched Bradley working the room. He was holding a glass of scotch, laughing effortlessly with the city's top venture capitalists. Standing right beside him was Jasmine, our firm's junior associate. She was wearing a designer dress that cost more than her annual salary, looking up at him with wide, adoring eyes. She was not just an intern. The forensic audit of his hidden expenses had revealed a luxury apartment lease in her name, funded entirely by my stolen inheritance. At 8 o'clock, the master of ceremonies took the stage. And now, to unveil the future of urban development, the visionary behind the New Horizon initiative, Bradley. The applause was thunderous. Bradley walked to the podium, adjusting his expensive tie, radiating unearned confidence. He tapped the remote to start his presentation. Nothing happened. He tapped it again, a slight frown breaking his polished facade. I stepped out of the shadows and walked directly up the side stairs to the stage. Whispers rippled through the audience as I approached the podium. Bradley's eyes widened in genuine panic. He had revoked my security badges and locked me out of the corporate accounts, but I had left a legacy backdoor in the system, a standard maintenance protocol I implemented during the design phase that the hotel management never bothered to update. Bypassing his access controls had taken me exactly 45 seconds. "Good evening, investors," I said, leaning into the microphone. My voice was calm, projecting total authority across the silent ballroom. Bradley was about to show you the Horizon Initiative, but as the actual architect and legal owner of those designs, I thought I would share a more accurate financial projection. I pressed a button on my encrypted tablet. The massive digital screen behind us blazed to life. Instead of architectural renderings, the screen displayed a pristine, high-resolution image of Bradley's forged property deeds, side by side with a forensic handwriting analysis. The crowd gasped. I clicked to the next slide. A detailed flow chart of his offshore Cayman accounts, directly linking the firm's missing capital to his personal shell companies. "Natalie, stop this right now," Bradley hissed, stepping toward me, his face devoid of color. "You are insane." "I am analytical," I corrected smoothly, clicking to the final slide. It was a series of wire transfers and romantic text messages between Bradley and Jasmine, time-stamped during the exact hours of my father's funeral. As you can see, I announced to the room of stunned investors, the only thing Bradley has successfully engineered is a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. The intellectual property he is attempting to sell you tonight is stolen, and any financial commitments made to his holding company will render you complicit in a federal crime. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. I turned to look at Bradley. His carefully constructed world was disintegrating in real time, and I did not feel a single drop of pity. Chaos erupted in the ballroom. Investors were shouting, frantically pulling out their phones to call their legal teams. Bradley lunged toward the microphone, his polished demeanor completely shattered into a million pieces. "It is a lie," he screamed, his voice cracking with pure desperation. The federal agents, who had been monitoring the situation under the prosecutor's directive, chose this moment to intervene. They didn't need to be in the room. They had been watching from the wings, waiting for the undeniable public admission of fraud. But his protests were instantly drowned out by the heavy sound of the ballroom doors swinging open. 4 uniformed Chicago police officers, accompanied by a federal prosecutor, Julia, had coordinated with, marched directly down the center aisle. Jasmine shrank back against the front row tables, her face ashen. Bradley looked desperately at her, seeking an ally. "Jasmine, tell them about our family, about the baby." I stepped away from the podium, watching him unravel. During Julia's deep dive into Jasmine's background to trace the embezzled funds, we had uncovered an anomaly in her medical records. "She cannot help you, Bradley," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the commotion. "And neither can the child you thought you were using to secure her loyalty. The baby is not yours. Jasmine has been engaged to a personal trainer for a year. I didn't snoop into your medical records for fun, Bradley. I uncovered the truth because your shell company was paying for Jasmine's maternity expenses while she was filing insurance claims under a different name. It's not just an affair. It's a systematic fraud against our investors. You were simply her ATM. I have the paternity test results right here, verified by the clinic, proving the timeline of the pregnancy predates your involvement with her." Jasmine buried her face in her hands, sobbing. Bradley stopped dead, his eyes darting wildly between his mistress, the police, and the damning financial evidence still glowing on the massive screen behind us. The illusion of his power was utterly decimated. As the police read him his rights and locked the handcuffs around his wrists, I looked at the man I once thought I would build a life with. This is the ultimate tragedy of a world without legacy. When you dedicate your entire existence to stealing the labor, the genius, and the inheritance of others, you build a fortress out of smoke. Bradley had craved the respect of a visionary architect and the wealth of an industry titan, but he possessed none of the substance required to earn them. He had stolen my blueprints because his own mind was completely barren. He had stolen my father's money because he had no moral or financial foundation of his own. When a person exists solely by consuming the light of others, they are left with nothing but darkness when the source is removed. By trying to steal my legacy, He had guaranteed that his only lasting legacy would be a federal prison inmate number. A thief never truly owns what they take. They merely hold it until the laws of physics and justice reclaim it. "Natalie, please," he begged as the officers began to lead him away. "We can fix this. We were partners." I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing. The emotional ledger was perfectly balanced. "We were never partners, Bradley," I said coldly, my voice cutting through the noise of the ballroom. "I was the architect. You were just a bad investment, and I am officially cutting my losses." I turned my back on him and walked off the stage. I did not look over my shoulder as they marched him out the doors. The aftermath of the gala was swift, brutal, and entirely decisive. With Bradley sitting in a holding cell facing 20 years in federal prison for fraud, forgery, and corporate embezzlement, the ensuing legal battles were remarkably brief. Julia, executing our strategy with surgical precision, seamlessly orchestrated the immediate return of my father's commercial properties and the restoration of my stolen intellectual property. I systematically cleared house at Summit Design Group. I fired the board members who had turned a blind eye to Bradley's accounting anomalies and took my rightful place as the sole chief executive officer. The firm was finally mine, in name and in practice. But reclaiming my company was only the first phase of my personal reconstruction. I knew exactly what it felt like to be pushed into the margins. I knew the specific agony of having your brilliance dismissed as mere technical support, and the humiliation of watching someone else stand on a stage taking credit for the very structures you sacrificed your sleep to build. I used a substantial portion of my recovered inheritance to establish the Horizon Foundation, a dedicated nonprofit organization providing legal, financial, and professional advocacy for female architects and engineers. I wanted to ensure that no woman in my industry would ever be forced to surrender her blueprints, her credit, or her personal boundaries to a manipulative partner. As I sit in my corner office today, looking out over the sprawling Chicago skyline, the cold, analytical anger that fueled my forensic audit has completely faded. It has been replaced by a profound, unshakable peace. I want to take a moment to speak directly to you, the person listening to this right now. I know what it is like to feel invisible in your own life. I know the quiet, suffocating pain of being the one who always gives, the one who stays up late fixing the errors of others, only to be systematically pushed to the extreme edges of your own story. This is a letter to those who always feel marginalized, the silent architects of everyone else's success. You have been conditioned to believe that your endless sacrifices are required to keep the peace. You have been manipulated into thinking that setting a firm boundary makes you difficult, and that demanding basic respect makes you unreasonable. I am here to tell you that your brilliance does not require their validation to be real. You do not have to be the silent investor in a toxic relationship. You do not have to normalize the casual cruelties of people who profit off your emotional and physical exhaustion. The exact moment you stop accepting their depreciated valuation of your worth, their power over you completely evaporates. Reclaiming your center is not an act of hostility, it is an act of pure survival. I have come to realize that forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes, it's the only way to set yourself free. I did not forgive Bradley because he earned it. I forgave the version of myself that had stayed quiet for so long, and in doing so, I demolished the final psychological wall he had built around my mind. You hold the blueprints to your own life. You have the ultimate power to knock down the walls that no longer serve you and build something magnificent from the ground up. If this story resonated with you, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and share your own stories of resilience. Tell me about a time you found the courage to cut toxic ties, set a firm boundary, and rebuild your life on your own terms. Your story might be the exact blueprint someone else needs to start their own journey.